range. That's up to 25% impacted. Mild, notice the words, by the way, mild is up to 50% impacted with these opaque white patches. And moderate impacts 100% of the tooth surface, and this impacts over 1 in 100. It not only impacts 100% of the tooth surface, it tends to get discolored and with indentations. And amongst other things, that causes psychological damage to teenagers who don't want to smile or talk on their first date. Now, it turns out that the first year of life is the worst year for exposure to fluoride as far as developing dental fluorosis. And that's what prompted, on November of 2006, the American Dental Association, in an e-gram to its members, said, this is what they should advise parents: if using a product that needs to be reconstituted, parents and caregivers should consider using water that has no or low levels of fluoride. That's their advice. But they didn't get this warning to parents. And nobody is getting this warning to parents in the agencies which promote fluoridation. Nobody in Health Canada is taking steps to warn parents in London or any other fluoridated community that they shouldn't be using tap water to make up baby formula. Nor has anybody worked out what you're going to do with low-income families that can't afford bottled water. So look at what happened. We tried to get this warning. In the New Hampshire legislature, we tried to get legislation which would require water departments in fluoridated communities to put this warning on the water bills. Your water is fluoridated. Parents should not use tap water to make up baby formula. We tried to get their warning to parents. And guess what? The American Dental Association and its representatives in New Hampshire jumped all over this. They prevented this legislation from going through. And that's what is another example of working backwards. For them, it's more important to protect the water fluoridation program than it is to protect our babies, at least from developing dental fluorosis. They won't let us take their warning and get it to parents. And one of the things that you should think of doing in London, whilst you're waiting to get fluoride out of the water, that's clearly the goal that hopefully you'll all have by the time you leave here this evening. But in the interim, get the council to get the water department to put that warning on the water bills. It gets worse. A few weeks ago, the Centers for Disease Control announced that 41% of children aged 12 to 15 in the United States now have dental fluorosis. That the figures have leapt upwards. They've gone from very mild, from 17 to 28.5%. From mild, it's gone doubled, 4.1 to 8.6%, and moderate and even now serious, severe, up to 3.6%. It's a crisis. And the end result of this is that on January the 7th, the CDC announced that they're lowering the recommended level of fluoride in water. Not nearly enough, but it's a start. What about Canada? We do not have a nationwide survey of dental fluorosis in Canada. I mean, we've known from the moment you started fluoridation in Brantford in 1945. We have known, you have known, that fluoride causes dental fluorosis. And yet you're flying blind. You haven't got a systematic, comprehensive review of dental fluorosis rates in the different provinces and the different towns of Canada. And I ask you, why not? That's a pretty basic thing. Because one of the things you should be doing is to use the severity of dental fluorosis as a biomarker of exposure so that you could see if any of these childhood complaints that we're worried about, attention deficit syndrome, early onset of puberty, bone fractures, lowered IQ, etc., have any relationship to fluoridation. And you've got a measure that tells you how much fluoride the kid's been exposed to before their permanent teeth have erupted. And you're not using it. You're not doing the studies. But for that matter, you're not doing any health studies in Canada. A key question. This is the key question. When fluoride is damaging the baby's growing tooth cells by some internal mechanism, interfering with enzymes or what have you, what's it doing to the other developing tissues? This is what Arvid Carlson, some of you here who saw the videotape at the beginning. He won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2000. He's a neuropharmacologist. He designs drugs to get into the brain and to do good things. And he led the successful campaign to keep fluoridation out of Sweden in the 1970s. And this is one of the arguments he used in 1978. One wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride, such as occurs in bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain and the other organs. The baby should not be exposed to fluoride up to 250 times the level of fluoride that occurs in mother's milk. The brain is very, very sensitive tissue. It's not fully protected at birth. Now, this is the National Research Council. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. There have now been over 100 animal experiments which shows that fluoride can damage the brain. There have been 24 published studies from China, Iran, India, and Mexico indicating that moderate exposure to fluoride, naturally occurring fluoride, is associated with lowered IQ in children. And I want to tell you about one of those studies because we've got them all listed on our webpage and they're all listed in our book. I want to tell you about one study because I had the opportunity to go to China and visit the two villages where this study was conducted. One village, the well water, the fluoride levels were less than 0.7 parts per million, and in the other village, the levels were between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million. Now, when I visited those villages, what was remarkable about them is how similar they were in every respect. The housing was the same. The occupations were the same. They were all rural farmers. The education system was the same. The diet was the same. Everything that you could think of, the lifestyle was the same. Rural farmers. The big difference was this level of fluoride in their well water. In a way, it was an ideal place for an epidemiological study. But they also controlled for lead exposure. There was no difference in the lead exposure, and there was no difference in iodine uptake. It's important because both of those can interfere with IQ. Now, they found that across the whole age range, IQ was lowered by 5 to 10 IQ points. There was a complete shift in the curve of IQ. So there were fewer geniuses in the high fluoride village and more mentally handicapped children in the village with the high fluoride doses. Not that high notes, 2.5 to 4.5. And Zhang estimated that the threshold was 1.9 parts per million. That's when you see the lowering of IQ begin. Now, this is where the margin of safety argument comes in big time. If the fluoride is associated with the lowering of IQ of children, 1.9 parts per million, in a small population, there's about 300 kids in that village, the 2.5 to 4.5 parts per million. Now think about it. Those kids are all Chinese, fairly stable population, so a pretty homogeneous gene pool there. Now, what have you got to do if you're a regulator and you know that harm is occurring at 1.9? You've got to have a margin of safety to protect the whole population. And the whole population is not Chinese coming from one village. The whole population is many different nationalities in Canada, many different health status, many different sensitivities. You have to assume at least a range of sensitivity to any toxic substance, at least a factor of 10. A factor of 10. In other words, you have to assume that in your whole population, that some children are going to be 10 times more sensitive to the endpoint, to this toxic substance, than the other children. 10 times. So in order to find a dose which is protective of the whole population, you have to have a margin of safety of 10. Okay? Margin of safety of 10. A safety factor of 10. Now I'm going to make the calculation a little simplified by, let's assume that all those children are drinking just 1 litre of water a day. Now 1.9 parts per million is 1.9 milligrams per litre. And if they're all drinking 1 litre, then this dose that's causing harm is 1.9 milligrams per day. So now let's divide that by 10. And so the safe dose, which we're establishing in order to protect every child in Canada from possible brain damage from drinking fluoridated water, is 0.19 milligrams per day. That's 1.9 divided by 10. That is standard toxicological procedure. This is the standard stuff that you do in any risk assessment for a toxic substance. I've done it myself umpteen times. I've taught my students how to do this umpteen times. We did this umpteen times for health risk assessments conducted for incinerators. 0.19 milligrams of fluoride is less than half a glass of water. So to protect the whole population of Canadian children, you don't want them drinking more than half a glass of water, of fluoridated water. Obviously, that's not happening. So you've got, please put up your hand if you understand what I've just taken you through. There is no margin of safety to protect all of Canada's children from lowering of IQ caused by fluoride based upon this Chinese study. And it's not just one study, it's 24 studies. Now, it's possible that you can find things wrong with the methodology, and that's normally what they try to do. But if that methodology is sound, then you're not protecting your children from brain damage from drinking fluoridated water. And since then, there have been 2 more studies that are very important. There's a study from Mexico which showed a very clear association between visual spatial learning and fluoride exposure, which is part of the brain development. And this one, look at this one. This is still online. It hasn't actually occurred yet in print, but it's online in the Journal of Hazardous Materials. They found a lowering of IQ in communities where the average water was 1.3 parts per million and the range was 0.3 to 3 parts per million. And their conclusions: overall, our study suggested that low levels of fluoride exposure in drinking water had negative effects on children's intelligence, and the results also confirmed the dose-response relationship between urine fluoride concentrations and IQ scores. Now, this is good. What they did here, by they're looking at urine levels, they've brought this closer to individual exposure. You've eliminated the notion of how much water the kids have drunk, because you know from the level of fluoride in their urine how much they've been exposed to. And this level of fluoride in their urine correlates with the lowering of IQ. There's the graph. So as the fluoride levels in the water goes up, so the IQ levels come down. And they actually quote this figure: an increase in the urine fluoride concentration of 1 milligram per litre is associated with a decrease of 0.59 IQ scores. 0.59 for each 1 milligram. But, of course, in Canada, you're okay because no one's measuring the fluoride in the urine of your children. So we have no need to worry about that.